Hello guys and welcome back. So today we are discussing a case that is local to me. I am from Perth, Australia. And this is a case that when people ask me what case is a case that you continue to think about, a case that you want to see, a conclusion to, this is probably the number one case that comes to mind. This occurred back in 1988 and it's probably Perth's most baffling mystery. And since then, this case has actually been linked to maybe one of Australia's biggest cases, the Claremont serial killer case. And of course, now the Claremont serial killer case has wrapped up. The trial has been and gone, but this case today is still unsolved. And there is a very long-running theory that today's victim, Julie Cutler, was the first Claremont serial killer victim back in 1988. And I'll discuss why I think this is relatively possible as we go on in the video. And actually today's case on Julie Cutler, I did cover on my channel when I first started 5 odd years ago. I'm going to actually private that video because it is quite old and a bit outdated. I was just starting out. Probably wasn't the best true crime YouTuber out there 5 years ago. But since then, there has been an inquest. So there's a lot of new information to discuss today. So I am really excited. Well, excited is not the word, but I'm happy to be bringing you this case and bringing you a lot of new information on it. And who knows, as we discussed in the last video, it only takes one person in the community to hold the key to solving a case. And I think this is, one of those cases where somebody knows something. So let's dive into the 34-year-old case of the missing and presumed murdered Julie Cutler. So let's discuss who Julie Cutler was. First of all, she was very young. She was just 22 years old. And back in the late 80s, she was working as a room attendant at the Parmelia Hilton Hotel here in Perth, which actually still does exist today. Growing up, Julie was particularly close with her father, Roger, as she did lose her mother at a very young age. And she also had a half-sister named Nicole. Julie attended Perth's prestigious Iona Presentation College, which also happened to be the same school attended by Claremont victims Sarah Spears and Kira Glennon. But more on the Claremont connection later. After high school, Julie attended the WA Institute of Technology, now known as Curtin University, studying theatre arts and English literature. After graduating, she went on to have several casual jobs, including working in a theatre and working at the Fremantle Markets, which is like a well-known markets here in Perth. But it wasn't long before Julie grew a little bit bored of sleepy Perth and decided that she needed to go on a big adventure of her own. So she saved up all of her money and in March of 1987, she headed off on a 9-month European trip. And on this trip, she worked as an au pair and she had a few holiday romances. She went to places like Paris. And overall, it sounds like she had a really great experience. And by the way, I say sleepy Perth because I live here, so I can say that. I'm kidding, but Perth is a great place to live. But back in the 80s, it was more of like a big country town, and in a way it kind of still is. There's kind of the old joke of, everyone in Perth knows everybody by about 2 degrees of separation. We have great beaches, great weather, but there's not much else going on. Even though I love living here, but yeah, you know what? Perth is definitely still a bit of a sleepy city. It's slow living. But anyway, as I said, Julie was young. She was younger than 22 in 87. I think she was about 21. So of course she wanted to go out and have an adventure of her own. I mean, who doesn't want to do that at that age? I know at that age I went off on my own little trip, so I completely get it. And I tell you what, at that age, at Julie's age, living in Perth, my God, did I think this city was rubbish. I hate to say it because I love Perth now and I appreciate it for what it is. But yeah, mate, when you grow up here and there's not much going on and you see, the bigger cities having more things going on, you really would just want to get out and see the world. So completely understand what Julie's, mindset was at this time. And especially after finishing uni, working a few casual jobs, it was probably the best time to get out and see the world. But one particular incident on her European trip did put a bit of a downer on I guess, the entire experience. So while in Greece, apparently Julie had some sort of breakup with a boyfriend, and this affected her so much that she ended up committing self-harm. And it was her travel companion that found her in the hotel room, bloodied and in distress. So this travel companion took her to the hospital, and friends and family back home were notified of this incident. And it was also noted that committing self-harm was an out-of-character act for Julie. But having said that, from what I can tell, people also considered Julie a bit of a dramatic person, a bit of a drama queen. And I'm not saying that she would commit an act of self-harm to get attention, but what I'm saying is that I think her friends and family at the time viewed this incident as a kind of nothing occurrence. And we got to remember, back in the late 80s, mental health wasn't a consideration. I have a quote from one friend, Jennifer Ma, and she said, "Julie was known for drama, but because we knew who she was, we didn't take it too seriously," end quote. So I think there is quite a bit to unpack here with what her friend Jennifer said. First of all, from what I have read, Julie was, for the most part, very outgoing, very extroverted and very bubbly. So again, this was something very out of character for her. But I think this really is a reflection of that time period and how such incidents were really swept under the rug. I mean, if this happened today, you would immediately tell your friend or family member to seek help, go to therapy, check into a hospital. But back in the late 80s, it was just, oh, she's being dramatic, trying to get attention. Don't worry about it. She's a happy girl. There can't possibly be any underlying mental health issues. And I think we all know somebody that appears to be a very generally happy, outgoing, bubbly person, but they could be suffering from depression or anxiety or, anything. It's just because we see a surface level of how somebody acts day to day or when they're around us doesn't mean they're not struggling on the inside. And I really think this incident was probably a cry for help, especially if it was over a breakup with a boyfriend. And I'm not saying this to shame Julie or shame her friends and family because, obviously Julie was struggling with something and she didn't get the help she needed or deserved. And her friends and family probably didn't have the understanding or the education to realize that this was a cry for help. Anyway, now we've gone over that incident because I think that will become relevant as we go on. Let's continue on with our story. So Julie returned home from her travels in December of 1987 and she moved back into the home that she had been living in before in the suburb of Victoria Park with her half-sister Nicole. But Julie really was struggling to settle back into Perth life, into living with her sister. And in fact, her and her sister were not particularly getting along. And after one fairly heated argument, Julie ended up moving out and into a place in Fremantle with another friend of hers. In fact, I think it was her sister's friend, Fiona. But from what I can tell, Nicole did feel quite bad about this argument with her sister Julie, and she did attempt to make amends. She went to the Fremantle markets where Julie worked and had a bit of a chat with her about it, potentially apologised, and Julie told Nicole that she'd give her a call, but Julie never did, and Nicole would never see her sister again. So now we are in May of 1988, and around this time, Julie had this very terrifying encounter that she did end up reporting to the police. Basically, driving home from work one evening, a car began to follow her so closely it just about hit her rear bumper. And then this car attempted to run her off the road before veering in front of her and speeding off. Julie didn't recognize the car, and I don't think she got their number plate, but as I said, she did report this incident to the police. And unfortunately, this perpetrator was never identified. But another scary incident did also happen around this time. Julie's flat was broken into, and the person that broke in stole Julie's passport and bank cards, which does beg the question, was Julie being stalked around this time, or were both of these scary incidents just one big coincidence? So this brings us to mid-1988, and on June 18, Julie had a shift at the Parmelia Hilton and was working alongside another woman named Carmelia Fleming. So Julie and Carmelia were cleaning up a room that evening. It was on the 10th floor, the penthouse suite apparently. And on this particular evening, Julie was very upset and in tears actually over another breakup with a boyfriend. And again, she's 22 years old. I think that nobody at 22 handles breakups well, and it sounds like maybe Julie took them worse than most. I mean, honestly, a breakup at any age is rough. But it sounds like Julie was perhaps a very sensitive person when it came to breakups. Maybe she, struggled when it came to dating, and who knows. I don't have too much information about her personal life. This is what I'm taking from the information I have from my sources and the inquest. But anyway, during this shift, Julie actually kept running up to the balcony and proclaiming to Carmelia, I want to end my life. I want to end my life. And Carmelia told her, don't be silly. You're too young. Again, I think it was very much, swept under the rug, brushed off. She's being dramatic. It's just Julie being a drama queen again. I don't think Carmelia at the time would have thought, I think this girl might need some help. I'm just assuming, but that's how I'm seeing this situation. And we don't really have any context as to the way Julie was saying this to Carmelia. Like maybe she was being dramatic. I think we've all sort of said or done things, when we're upset or we're just being silly, like, I've had the worst day. I could just jump off this balcony. I just feel like I could just die. I know that we've said things that are dramatic. So I don't think we have really any context, unfortunately, for this conversation. We don't really know. There's no way to know if Julie was being dramatic or if she was actually suicidal. And I think if we take into account the incident that happened in Greece and now this incident that Carmelia is telling us about, we can conclude that, perhaps Julie struggled with a few mental health issues. So the following day, Julie had another shift at the Parmelia Hilton, working 6 till 10 p.m. And she actually had plans to go to the Parmelia Hilton's staff awards night after work, being held at the hotel's a high-end nightclub called Juliana's. So she brought with her a change of clothes, and after work she got out of her white shirt, black skirt and tights and into a more formal black dress with a high collar and buttons on the shoulders. She then headed down to the staff awards night / what sounded more like a party, and she knocked back a couple of champagnes, probably trying to catch up with all of her workmates since she finished work at 10, and I'm assuming the awards night would have started a little bit earlier. And, Julie was seen chatting and having a good time and having a bit of a dance, and overall it sounds like, it was a good time had by all. Several people also noted that Julie was having a chat with 2 Polish hotel employees, 2 housemates named, and I'm going to absolutely butcher these pronunciations, so forgive me, I will have this spelling on the screen. Tadeusz or Tadeusz Maciejewski and Gregory Schwatek. Again, I'm so sorry to any Polish listeners. I assume there's not too many of you, but hey, massive shout out if you are from Poland. Comment down below. Let me know how my pronunciation was. And again, apologies in advance. But anyway, gave it my best shot. So Tadeusz and Gregory actually invited Julie and one of her friends, Consuela Harper, over or back to their place for a few more drinks that evening. And Julie was apparently keen, but Consuela was not particularly keen. So Julie decided, if my friend's not going, I'm not going either. Totally fair enough. So neither of them went. Didn't seem to be any big deal. And as I said, people that spoke to Julie that night reported that she was in high spirits, except for one person. One person who I don't have the name of did report that Julie brought up the topic of suicide, but that was the only person that said anything negative about Julie's, not attitude, but how she was feeling that night. So at around 12:30 p.m. that evening, Julie and Consuela left the staff party, the awards party, and headed to the staff car park. And on their walk, Julie told Consuela that she was meeting up with somebody else that evening. And when Consuela, who was incredibly curious, said, "Who are you meeting up with?" Julie responded, "It's a secret. I can't tell." And it's also worth noting that Consuela says that Julie was quite drunk at this point. Now, there is conflicting information about what Julie did next. Some people say that she went back to the staff party and was one of the last people to leave. And others say that she had plans to head to the casino, but nobody saw her at the casino. And either way, even if she headed back to the staff party, the latest that she was reported to have left the Parmelia Hilton was at around 1 a.m. So she hopped in her grey two-toned 1963 Fiat sedan that she had purchased herself just earlier that year and made a left turn on Mounts Bay Road heading east. But before driving off into the night, Julie actually spotted the hotel's sous chef, Jeffrey Pierce, standing alone in the dark and in the rain. So she stopped her vehicle and said to Jeffrey, do you need a lift? Jeffrey said, "No, it's fine. I'm waiting for my girlfriend. Don't worry about me." So off Julie drove into the dark and stormy night. The next day, Julie failed to turn up for her shift at the Parmelia Hilton, and by Tuesday, her housemate reported Julie missing to her family, telling her family that she hadn't seen Julie since Sunday evening or since Sunday when she had gone to the staff party. And after this, Julie Cutler was reported missing to the police. So the next day after Julie was reported missing, down at Cottesloe Beach just before lunchtime, a swimmer found a very unusual item in the water, a car. This car was partially buried in the sand and about 50 metres or 164 feet from the shoreline, sitting halfway between the groin and the Surf Lifesaving Club. The police were of course called and the car was extracted from the ocean using a four-wheel drive tow truck. And upon its retrieval, the first thing that police and bystanders noticed was the car's roof had been completely crushed in and the bonnet as well as the back seat were missing. I will of course have these photographs on the screen for you because they're very hard to explain and they are rather shocking and disturbing images to have a look at, seeing the state of this vehicle. As investigators ventured into the vehicle to have a look around to try and figure out how the heck this car got in the ocean, the first thing that they noticed, and the most obvious, was that there was no body in the car. The driver's door was ajar, however, and the window was open, so it is possible that the body could have floated out had there been a body in there in the first place. A land, air and sea search did actually occur, but nothing was ever really discovered. But the back seat that had been missing from the vehicle did actually wash up separately, which meant that anything else that had been in the vehicle would have very likely also washed up, but nothing else ever did. And the only other notable things that were found in this vehicle were some champagne flutes from the Parmelia Hilton Hotel and the driver's license of 22-year-old Julie Cutler, the woman that had been reported missing just one day previous. Of course, it was quickly established that this vehicle did belong to Julie Cutler, and as the investigation continued to examine this vehicle, they did find a few other notable things. So in the ashtray, they found cigarette butts from a brand of cigarettes that Julie didn't even smoke. They found several hairs on the seat covers, and they found a piece of paper with their name Mike and a home address on it that had been written in Julie's handwriting. Of course, the police did track down this Mike guy, considering that they had his address and all, but he was found to have no connection to Julie's disappearance. And another thing that was noted was that Julie's handbag was nowhere to be found. It wasn't in the vehicle, didn't wash up, and Julie was known for taking her handbag everywhere. So where exactly did it end up? But that wasn't even the strangest thing. Police actually found Julie's wallet or purse back at her flat in Fremantle, which begs the question, did Julie go home that evening? Had she gotten all the way home, and was she planning to go out again and meet this mystery person that she told her friend Consuela about, or had she forgot her wallet that day? Unfortunately, we still don't know the answer to this. So what exactly were the first thoughts from investigators, given how bizarre this situation was? Well, as you can imagine, opinions were quite mixed because there really was, well, I guess in a way there was a lot of evidence. You know, you have an entire vehicle, but on the other hand, I guess a lot of evidence would have been destroyed by the water, and of course they have no body. So of course foul play was considered one theory, and another theory that was briefly considered but ruled out was the chance it was an accident, with the only other real somewhat solid theory being suicide. If we take into account the incident that happened in Greece, the situation where she spoke of ending her life on one of her shifts, jumping off a balcony, and the fact that one of the employees at the staff party claimed that Julie spoke of suicide on the night of the staff party, well, the possibility of it being suicide cannot be completely ruled out, although, of course, I acknowledge, and I'm sure the investigation acknowledges, that it would be a very strange way to end your life. But perhaps if she had been going through a bad breakup and it had put her in a bad headspace, that combined with drinking alcohol that evening, drinking and driving, which I'm actually not sure if that was illegal in 1988. Surely it was, or at least frowned upon. I'm not sure. But regardless, Julie had had a few drinks that evening. Or there's the other possibility that perhaps she made what was, a life-ending decision to meet up with a stranger. Maybe that's something that she wouldn't normally have done, but because she was feeling sad, depressed, suicidal, she decided to take a risk and meet up with somebody that she didn't really know very well, and this person had bad intentions. And her friends and family have actually since said that Julie did suffer with bouts of depression, although she was never diagnosed with depression. So when I say bouts of depression, I can only really say bouts of sadness. And they said these were usually tied to events like a breakup with a boyfriend. But her friends and family are certain, they are convinced, they very strongly believe that Julie did not and would not take her own life. And then there is, of course, the, vague possibility that Julie decided to disappear on her own accord. And I think this is a theory that is thrown into any sort of mystery missing person type of case. And of course, it is always a possibility that someone decided to make themselves disappear. And, if Julie had returned from her European holiday and just was feeling depressed, was going through these breakups, just felt like she wasn't fitting into Perth, maybe she that night decided she didn't want to be here, or she wanted to run away. Her passport had been stolen. Maybe it had not been stolen. Maybe she had reported it stolen and she up and left. In 1988, that was a pretty simple task to make yourself disappear. And trust me, I understand this is a very far-fetched theory. Do I personally believe that she made herself disappear? Not really. Did the investigation believe this? Not really. But seeing as Julie, was described as a dramatic person, rolling your car into the ocean and leaving your friends and family with this massive mystery, while very cruel, is incredibly dramatic. And the final very loose theory I do want to discuss is the fact that Julie's back doors of her car actually did not lock, which of course leaves open the possibility that somebody lay in wait in her back seat. Maybe, somebody was going around to the Parmelia Hilton Hotel staff car park, checking car doors, found Julie's car, realized they could get in the back seat, decided to lay there and wait so they could, mug her maybe. And things went very wrong, and this was the end result. Of course, there is actually zero proof of this. It is just a theory. So I think it's important to discuss how Julie's vehicle actually entered the water. So it was either driven, pushed or rolled off of the beaches of Cottesloe Beach's retaining wall, as the car was found in the neutral position with the keys still in the ignition and the headlights on. The groin at Cottesloe was the other place that it was considered that her car was potentially rolled or pushed or driven off of, but given the weather that night and the high tide, the retaining wall really is the only location at Cottesloe that makes sense for her car to have been driven, pushed or rolled off. Also, given the damage that occurred to the car, the retaining wall really is the only place that makes sense. Overall, the vehicle and these unusual clues left the investigation with more questions than answers, and really we're only left with two viable theories: murder or suicide. And I think most people, the investigation, Julie's friends and family, the general public, lean towards the murder theory, and I really do too, but we'll get a bit more into that as well as we go on. After all, driving her or pushing her vehicle into the ocean would be the perfect way to destroy evidence in a murder. Of course, it would also be a very dramatic ending to someone's life if that is how they chose to go. And the final thing I want to touch on in this part of the video is the fact that Cottesloe Beach is a very popular beach. And I know that Julie went missing, or a vehicle at least went into the water in the middle of the night, certainly between 1 and 5 a.m. It was winter, the tide was high, the weather was terrible. But for not one single soul to be down at the beach, near the beach, in the area, it seems almost unbelievable. Even, if somebody was out and about nearby going for a walk, it was like, it's just, it's a popular area, and it's not, for an entire vehicle with its headlights on, it's not like the headlights were even off, to go into the water and nobody heard anything, saw anything. This is just one of those mysteries that is going to continue to leave me scratching my head every time I go over what little evidence we have. So going back to the investigation momentarily, of course, the police did interview everybody that was at the staff party, including the two Polish hotel employees, Tadeusz and Gregory. Their flat and vehicle was actually searched, but nothing of significance was ever found, and the two men were ruled out. But I am going to temporarily jump ahead in the timeline for a second and continue talking about these two men. So several years after Julie's disappearance, the Cutler family began receiving these phone calls from an anonymous caller with a European accent. And this caller was telling the Cutler family that he was the man that they were looking for, but that he had plans to leave Western Australia. The Cutler family received 6 calls in total before the calls stopped around 1994, which coincidentally was the same time that Tadeusz ended up leaving Australia and going back to Poland. So Tadeusz also left Australia before police even had a chance to re-interview him regarding these strange phone calls. And, of course, the police have tried to track him down since he got back to Poland, but strangely, they have never been successful in finding him. He has basically disappeared somewhere in Poland. And since then, police have never found him. Not a trace, not a clue where he is. So I think that is incredibly suspicious. And this kind of behavior, calling the family of a victim, or more like taunting or torturing the family of a victim several years after a murder or a disappearance has occurred, is very reminiscent of other cases I have either looked into, read about, or talked about in the past, where a killer, a perpetrator, wants recognition for their work because, as we know, or if you're into, criminal psychology, a killer, even though they might not want to be caught, often kind of craves the attention without directly getting the attention. So a perpetrator may taunt law enforcement or a family in order to get these small bouts of attention without being caught. And, they can feel all smug about it and continue getting recognition while still remaining anonymous. Obviously, it's incredibly sick, but this does happen. For example, BTK, the bind, torture, kill killer, came out from the woodwork after years to taunt law enforcement through letters and ended up making one very silly mistake that meant he got caught. Anyway, this isn't to say that Tadeusz is Julie's killer, but it's definitely a possibility considering he never spoke to the police again before leaving for Poland and has disappeared since returning to Poland. Incredibly suspicious. And I think it's certainly a possibility that he at least, even if he's not the killer, perhaps he knows what happened. And speaking of anonymous phone calls, one other person in Julie's family, her cousin, Jacqueline Hunter, also received an anonymous phone call from a woman claiming that she heard screams coming from Cottesloe Beach on the night that Julie disappeared. But this woman has never been identified and no one has ever come forward since with any similar information. So we're going to jump back in the timeline again and back to the investigation. So we're now in 1989. And another very, very strange clue emerges. So basically around the time of Julie's disappearance, a kebab shop owner found a plastic bag under a table in their kebab shop. And in this plastic bag were some items of clothing, but thinking nothing of it, they sort of put this discovery to the side and I guess forgot about it until the following year when they saw Julie's disappearance in the media, and hearing about her case must have set off some kind of alarm bells for them, and they handed this plastic bag into the police. So in the plastic bag was a white t-shirt and black pantyhose, just like the ones Julie would have been wearing the night that she disappeared, not the outfit she was wearing to the staff party, but her Parmelia Hilton Hotel clothing. So like I said, she brought a change of clothes with her for the staff party, but she would have, taken her staff clothing off and put it aside. So the white t-shirt or the white, button-up shirt it would have been in particular was examined, and it was found to be the exact make of the shirt that was designed for the Parmelia Hilton Hotel. And in fact, this shirt was one of 37 that was ever made. And furthermore, it was actually in Julie's size, which I would say makes a possibility this was Julie's shirt incredibly, incredibly high. Therefore, we can also assume the stockings are very likely Julie's. So how did this plastic bag with assumably Julie's items of clothing end up in this kebab shop? And what tears me apart, although I'm guessing they probably didn't have CCTV in 1987, but if the kebab shop owner had handed it into the police when they found it, maybe somebody would have seen something, but it's not their fault. Like if I found something like that, I wouldn't think anything of it, let alone tying it to a murder or a potential murder investigation. But it's like basically this discovery is the one, oh no, it's not the one. We're still getting there. This is one of the few items that has ever been recovered that has been strongly connected to Julie Cutler's disappearance. And realistically, they couldn't really, it just added more confusion. It didn't help them in any way. It literally just added more confusion to this entire investigation. And then it's like, who would have put it there? Did her potential killer put it there? Did Julie put it there? Why would she put it there? Had she been in the CBD that evening? Had she gone and got a kebab that evening? I mean, we've all been there getting a kebab after drinks, Did somebody find it and, find that there was nothing of significance in the bag and just dump it? We don't know. And I'm thinking we might never know. And believe it or not, this incredibly crucial evidence was not only never forensically examined, but they never held on to it. It was, along with every other piece of evidence in the Julie Cutler case, destroyed or gotten rid of, which blows my mind. If we think of, the Claremont case and how thank God, in hindsight, if you know anything about that case, it was a lot of little crimes before Bradley Edwards committed the murders that connected him to being the Claremont killer. Had this small, minute evidence not been held on to in those cases, the Claremont case would never have been solved. So now we have Julie's case and they've kept nothing? Are you kidding me? Like, I'm sorry. Look, I'm sure that at some point the police must run out of room in, their storage, forensic evidence lockers, wherever they keep evidence. But come on. Like, it's unacceptable. A young girl goes missing and all we actually have, as far as I'm aware, are photographs. That's it. Imagine if we had those items of clothing now, the forensic technology that could have been used on them to potentially solve this case. This is why this case is so frustrating to me. Like, I think it could have been so solvable. And aside from the fact that I believe somebody has to know something, potentially the Claremont serial killer, who knows, we'll get into that in a moment, it's just incredibly frustrating. It really is. And of course, this piece of evidence did very temporarily throw Julie's case back into the spotlight, which was great. But it would actually be another 9 years before any more significant evidence was found tied to Julie's disappearance. So I do want to briefly mention one other super strange element to this case, as if there's not enough of them. But anyway, this one is going to baffle you. So back in 1986, 2 years before Julie went missing, a group of students at her university, assumably film students, made a film called Nocturnals about a man that drives his car off the groin at Cottesloe Beach because he's suicidal. And the star of this film happened to be none other than Julie's then boyfriend. It's not even believed that Julie knew this film ever existed, and police have, of course, looked into the film and those involved in it, and they do not believe that it has anything to do with Julie's disappearance, but it is a very strange coincidence nonetheless. So let's fast forward to 1996 when a beachcomber named Cal Redfern made a discovery in the sand dunes at Cottesloe Beach. I gotta be honest, I didn't know that beachcombers were a thing before I researched for this video. But I'm guessing they're just people that sort of, comb the sand at beaches looking for, long since buried items. Could be an interesting hobby. I don't know. Let me know if you're a beachcomber. I don't know. Oh dear. So anyway, Cal did find some very interesting items in the sand, including a diary from 1988, a checkbook, a pen, and a tan-coloured purse. Of course, Cal didn't think much of these discoveries and he took them home and he held on to them until I think the following year when he ended up hearing about Julie's case, like the kebab shop owner, and he handed these items over to the police. And of course, the police had a look at them, and the checkbook actually was the same bank as Julie belonged to. And the diary, well, there wasn't anything in it except for a couple of pen squiggles, but it did line up with Julie's habit of keeping a diary. And of course, 1988 was the year that Julie disappeared. However, after speaking with several people that knew Julie, nobody recognised these items as belonging to her, and like everything else in Julie's case, including her car, this evidence was destroyed. So by the time that police reopened Julie's case in 2017, as I said, they had no physical evidence to examine, and considering how far forensic technology has come, that is a real shame. So these items found by Cal, the beachcomber, were actually re-examined as part of the 2017 reinvestigation and found to be potentially connected to Julie's disappearance, which is none too helpful now considering that the police never held on to the items. And also since 1988, all the original witness statements had somehow become lost. So police had to re-interview 300 people, including the other Polish worker at the Parmelia Hilton, Gregory, whose last name I'm not even going to try and pronounce again. But Tadeusz has still, as I said, not been tracked down. Suspicious. The police even went back to the Polish housemate's flat that they used to live at 30 years previous and did another forensic re-examination because, again, technology has evolved, even ripping out carpets and whatnot. But once again, unfortunately, nothing was found. The police even did a forensic dig at the sand dunes at Cottesloe Beach because, of course, the sand digger, sand comber, Cal, did find those items, but they didn't find anything. And even after re-examining all the evidence or lack thereof, photographs, witness statements, etc., the two main theories remained: suicide and murder. Also around this time, 2017, the police did put a $250,000 reward on offer for any information leading to an arrest and conviction in Julie Cutler's case. But as of recording this video, that does remain unclaimed. And of course, as with any unsolved videos that I discuss, I will leave information down below, like Crime Stoppers or anyone that you can get in touch with if you happen to know anything. And even Julie's father, Roger, has come out since reiterating the idea that, Perth was a big country town back in the 80s. So the chances of somebody knowing something is incredibly high. So finally, let's dive in to the Claremont serial killer case and its potential connection to Julie Cutler. As I did touch on before, I think, as I said, since recording my last video on Julie 5 years ago, the Claremont trial has been and gone. And for me, the Claremont trial really highlighted how many mistakes were made in Julie's investigation, initially, and even up until, mostly initially, honestly, the whole not keeping evidence, which, as I said, it was this early evidence from the Claremont investigation of crimes that Bradley Edwards wasn't even connected to that solved that case. And of course, hindsight's 2020, and I'm sure the original police on Julie's investigation did the best that they could, but mate, I think they screwed up. I'm sorry to say it, but they just, not good enough. If you do want more information as to how the Claremont case was solved, because it's just far too complicated to explain here, I'll link some videos down below. I do have a playlist on my channel. I think I've got like 4 videos on the Claremont trial. Don't watch the first 2. They're rubbish. Maybe I'll redo them one day. I don't know. But the last 2 I made, one about the trial and 2 about Bradley Edwards, are good informational videos. So if you want information as to how the Claremont trial was solved, because it's one of my favorite cases to discuss and talk about and look into, because it's fascinating and incredible how they did solve it. And actually, I do want to do a video on Sarah Spears. I just finished a book called Enigma of the Dark. Amazing book. If you are interested in the Claremont trial and you want more information on it, definitely pick up that book, purchase it. It's written by a local Perth journalist. Recommend. So what I mainly want to focus on is the possibility that Julie Cutler was the first Claremont serial killer victim. First of all, I do want to start by stating that Bradley Edwards is one of 44 suspects in the probable murder of Julie Cutler, but police do believe it's unlikely that he was involved. So back in 1988, Bradley Edwards was just 19 years old, and at this stage he was committing break-and-enters in Huntingdale. He was the Huntingdale Prowler. So as far as we know, he wasn't committing murders until the early 90s or 1996, 1997. That's as far as we know, but considering he won't even admit to Sarah Spears' murder, which he was not convicted for, who knows? Who actually knows? However, Bradley Edwards did sexually assault a teenager in 1988. In 1990, he attacked a woman at Hollywood Hospital, so who knows where that may have led had he not had that weird brain freeze snap out of it situation. And of course, in 1995, he committed the Caracutter rape. So it does seem like Edwards had a pattern of escalation, but who's really to say? So as I said before, Edwards was 19 in 1988 and Julie Cutler was 22. And not only did the pair attend the same university, but they actually took some of the same units. But as to whether they knew each other or even knew of each other, it's never been confirmed. And then there's the fact that we don't know who this mystery person was that Julie was going to meet up with on the night that she disappeared. And there was also the fact that her unit got broken into in Fremantle, which was the same year in which Brad Edwards was committing break and enters, although he was doing his break and enters in Huntingdale, as far as we know, not in Fremantle. And Brad Edwards also wasn't known for stealing like bank cards or passports. He stole underwear, of course. And then there's the fact that all 3 Claremont victims went missing after a night out, as did Julie Cutler. And my next theory has to do with the Claremont victim, Jane Rimmer. On Jane's final night alive, she decides not to share a taxi with friends because she says she's getting a lift from another friend. Jane is seen on CCTV waiting by the side of the road and checking her watch, and moments later a man appears in the footage and Jane breaks out into this massive grin, clearly happy to be seeing this person. We can only assume that she knew who this person was, although we never see this person from the front. We can only see him from behind, which is frustrating, but we can assume this is Bradley Edwards. And just after midnight, both Jane and this mystery man disappear from the CCTV. And of course, Jane is never seen again. And it's now believed that this person that Jane was getting a lift from was a friend of hers that she referred to as Bogsy, like a nickname, Bogsy. And Bogsy also happened to be Brad Edwards' nickname in high school. And not to mention the man in the CCTV from behind, in my opinion, although of course this isn't the clearest CCTV, I think he very much looks like Brad Edwards at that age. Of course, it has never been proven that that was Brad Edwards in the footage, although of course he has been convicted of Jane's murder, so, you know, we can assume that it was. And it's also never been proven that Jane said she was going to meet up with Bogsy that night, but it's basically just a friend that has come forward. A friend of Jane Rimmer's has come forward and said, you know, she was meeting up with a friend named Bogsy that night. And if that was Brad Edwards' nickname in high school, then logic would state that indeed Jane was friends with Bogsy. So I think it's very possible that potentially Bradley Edwards made a habit of befriending young women and meeting up with them late at night, perhaps, you know, after they've had a few drinks, after a night out, perhaps offering them lifts. You know, it's very, very, very similar circumstances. Jane, after a night out with drinks, meets up with Brad Edwards. Perhaps Julie, after a night out of drinking, meets up with her friend from uni, Brad Edwards. I don't know. It's a theory, but I think it's incredibly possible. Lastly, I want to touch on the Telstra Living Witness project that was touched on in the trial. Basically, the Telstra Living Witnesses are a group of women that believe they encountered Bradley Edwards back in the early 1990s in his Telstra van and, of course, you know, escaped. Most notably, Edwards hung around areas like Claremont and Cottesloe often late at night, and even telling one witness he had been driving around Cottesloe looking for damsels in distress like yourself. And look, I know the timeline isn't quite right, but gosh darn, it's a big bloody coincidence, isn't it? You know, Julie's car goes missing at Cottesloe Beach, and Brad Edwards is known for lurking around Cottesloe late at night looking for young damsels in distress, drunk women. Come on. Again, timeline is off, but bloody hell, like, I think it's such a strong possibility, truly. I mean, what are the chances that maybe Julie drove down to Cottesloe Beach? Maybe that was her favourite beach. Maybe she parked her car, sat down to have a think about her life because she'd been going through some tough times, coming back to Perth, going through breakups, feeling a bit down. She's sitting on the beach, a bit drunk, and who does she see? Some young, good-looking man, or perhaps even she thought, hey, that's Brad from uni. Hey, come take a seat with me. Let's have a chat. Let's go for a drive in my car. Who knows? You never bloody know. I did just want to throw this theory in towards the end of the video because although I guess it is somewhat unlikely, I also think it is somewhat likely. But let me know your thoughts on what theory you believe, I guess. Oh, and for the record, Brad Edwards actually refused to speak to the police about Julie Cutler's disappearance, which isn't surprising considering he won't even admit to Sarah Spears' murder. And lastly, in today's video, I want to discuss the recent inquest. As I said at the start of the video, the inquest was held since I last filmed a video about Julie's disappearance, which is why I've decided to re-talk about it. But unfortunately, the inquest didn't come to any real solid conclusion, except for the fact that Julie is very likely deceased by means of either murder or suicide. And as I said throughout the video, the inquest did reveal that Julie suffered from bouts of depression, undiagnosed from what I can tell, and they did discuss the incident in Greece, but it seems to have been concluded that Julie was not suicidal or mentally unwell. And from what I really understood or heard from the inquest, is that Julie kind of had two sides to her, the very bubbly, outgoing, extroverted side, and those days where she was very much sad and wanted to be alone and emotional. So who knows where her mental state was on the day she disappeared. And even though those that knew her best spoke at the inquest and gave, the information that they knew about her and their thoughts on where Julie was at, I don't think it paints a clear enough picture, and realistically, none of us know what was going through Julie's head the night she disappeared, or where she was at, what she did, where she went, who she met up with. These are just unanswered questions to this day, unfortunately. And I wish the inquest had given us more information, but it just simply did not. And it seems to me and others that the only way this case will be solved is if somebody in the community comes forward with new information, which is exactly why we need to keep talking about cases like this, even though they are, 30 plus years old. And if you saw my last video about Michelle Buckingham, that was, 30 plus years old, and it was solved by one person in the community. So I fully believe this case can be solved if that one person comes forward, or if Brad Edwards comes forward, who knows? The full inquest report is yet to be delivered, but from what I can tell, it seems like no new information is going to come out of this, which is very unfortunate. But anyway, thank you for being here and listening to Julie Cutler's story. This case is truly a baffling one. It's one that I've thought about for years and years and years and hoped to hear a conclusion on by now, but it doesn't seem like we're any closer. So let me know your thoughts down below, your thoughts on the theories I discussed. Again, if you have any information, contact Crime Stoppers. The information will be down below. And until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe.